Hey, what's up, everybody? Justin Soderberg back for another episode of the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. This week, we have New York Times bestselling author Stephen Graham Jones here to talk about his creation over at IDW, Earthdivers, the comic book series out now about trying to go back in time and kill Christopher Columbus. We also talk about his other novels. There's over nearly 30 novels on this podcast, as well as a bunch of random stuff here on Capes and Tights. But make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and visit capesandtights.com for more on comic book world, including a review of Earthdivers #1. And check out Earthdivers #2 in stores today, Wednesday, November 2nd, over at IDW. And enjoy, everybody. This is Stephen Graham Jones, New York Times bestselling author and creator of Earthdivers. Welcome, Stephen. How are you?
I'm great. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Yeah, it's Halloween, right?
Yeah, no, it's my day, man.
Exactly. I have a buddy of mine whose wedding anniversary is today, and another buddy of mine whose wife's birthday is today. So last night they had like a birthday party Halloween thing. He owns a restaurant in town, and they had that kind of thing. It's like my buddy who his name's Joseph Schmalke. I don't know if you know him at all, but he is a writer artist from Maine. He he just released a comic book called 7 Years in Darkness. Well, it's coming out on CEX, but yeah, he's the one. And at their wedding, they dressed up as Halloween, like in costume for their wedding. So yeah,
oh man,
it's his time of year for sure. He starts watching Halloween movies in like middle of September.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna chat here, and I honestly will tell you right now, I first learned about you when someone reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to take a look at your comic book. And it's always fun doing that because I get to learn about new people that I didn't end up falling in love with their work. And so my wife was like, how did you get into this dude? And I'm like, listen, it works out that way. And I ended up starting reading all kinds of stuff. But you obviously, like we mentioned before you started recording, you live in Boulder, Colorado, but I'm in Bangor, Maine here, Derry, Maine, which is home of Stephen King. And he's also a famous horror author, obviously. But you write all kinds of books and stuff like that. But we're here to talk about Earthdivers, and then I'd love to talk about some other stuff too. But so Earthdivers, IDW, artist Davide.
Yeah, Davide.
Jean Felice.
Yep.
Wow, yeah, I got that right. Look at that. I'm always names are always hard to get. And Joanna Lafuente, I did colors and letters by Stephen Wands. And this actually comes out as a podcast on Wednesday, November 2nd, which I believe is Earthdivers 2.
It is, yeah.
Look at that. Let me just say, a group of Native activists who go back in time and try to kill Christopher Columbus to stop the founding of America and save the world. So how did you come up with this this comic book in the first place?
You know, I think it's been like hiding inside me since elementary school, actually. Like I remember being in the back of 4th, 5th grade history class and, hearing the gospel of Christopher Columbus and thinking he discovered us, he discovered a place like we were already here. And he's like being made into this big hero. And by that time, of course, I knew that, he had enslaved us and done all infected us with all kinds of bad, it didn't end up good, him landing where he landed, And so I remember sitting there thinking, well, this is weird, and so I guess it took like probably 40-45 years for that to percolate up in me.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, and so this is a story that you obviously could have told in a novel, but ended up in the medium of a comic book. Are you, I mean, I'm going to ask this question, but I already know the answer to it, but I would like to hear your answer to it. Are you into comic books in general?
I am. I've been into comic books since I was 12 years old, since I found my first Secret Wars issue on the round rack at the gas station, I guess. But, as for why Earthdivers is a comic book instead of a novel, I really think that if I tried to write it as a novel, that I would get snagged up on the rigging looks this way in a 15th century caravel and all that stuff, it's better if that stuff is the background and it doesn't get the spotlight,
Absolutely. And that's funny how like I've talked to a couple people who have written books and comic books, and the partnership you have with your artist and colorist and letterer probably goes a long ways. It actually probably takes some of the pressure off of you. You can write the initial story and say, okay, now you make it look the way it looks. I mean, how'd you get it matched up with Davide and those people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we looked at a lot of artists, of course, and Davide's art just really stood out. So he was the easy choice there. But even before we started drawing the comic book, he was sending us sketches of the characters. Like maybe their color is like this, maybe their hair is like that, and so we would like look at 6 of them and pick this one and then this one. And it was really neat to me how the way that he was drawing these characters, the way he was sketching them out, became part of the story. Like it opened up story like doors that I had never considered, and it's really been cool. And as for artists are amazing. I don't see I mean, writers, we're always like every scene is a crowd scene, which artists aren't the biggest fans of, but I don't see how they keep like in Earthdivers in 2112. The backdrop is this like cave and mesa and kind of a little area around a river. And he has to keep that straight from every angle, which just blows me away having to do that, man.
And that's something I always, tip my hat to sequential artists who do that stuff. Like I'm an artist. My main thing is designing beer can labels for a brewery. But I do one static image and that's all I do. There's no sequential part of it. And the idea of being able to sequentially draw the same character over and over again, like you mentioned, from a different angle, even it's pretty crazy. So that
really is. They must know it in a way that I'll never know it. Like this, they must know this face in a way I'll never know this face.
Yeah. And do you, as you were obviously you had the script going and so on and so forth. Did you have any input on the art, or did you let the artist just take over?
No, the way it works, I'm sure it's the way it works for most people. I do the script, and then my editor, we go back and forth a few times trying to get the script in shape, figuring out where the page turns are and all that stuff. And then Davide gives us it's like thumbnails of what about this layout, and so we generally approve everything he says because he has a much better visual sense than we do. And then he'll put it in pencils and give us a look at the pencils. And we do some adjustments at the pencil level because like I might sketch out a page. I might write a page that say it has 6 panels, which to me really means it has 6 story beats, and then Davide will come in and maybe he gives it 8 panels, maybe he gives it 5 panels. And it's not that he's like swallowing or dilating any certain panel. He's figuring out the way it works from panel to panel and tier to tier and everything. But sometimes that takes a little adjustment afterwards to get the story beats to line up with everything,
That's awesome. And it also must be, you've written over almost 30 books, but like this is a team effort too. It must be nice. Is there something, obviously we mentioned the benefits of that, of having the input from other people, but like as myself, sometimes I just feel like I need to get things done myself because I know what I'm doing and I can just move forward and there's no hangups with other people. Obviously you have publishers and things like that around it too, but do you find it more difficult, easier, a little bit of both?
It's comic books are a lot busier than novels. Like there's a lot more back and forth. Like there's different stages. There's back and forth with the editor, back and forth with the artist, back and forth with the colorist, back and forth with the letterer. I'm not talking like back and forth like we spar with each other. It's always nice. But with a novel, it's just me and an editor. Marketing will get involved, copy editors and proofreaders will get involved, but those are all much lesser. Those are not as deep of dives, I guess. But every dive with the comic book seems to be a really deep dive, and it's a very, very time-consuming process. Yeah,
and having to create an issue that's 25, 30 pages long, and then have to end it a certain way that makes me as a character, as a reader, go, oh, I really want to pick up Earthdivers #2. Whereas a novel, you have a lot longer period of time before. And sometimes they're not connected. I know you do have some connected novels, but like sometimes it's just, that's it. And hopefully people like your writing enough that they'll pick another book up that's not connected.
Exactly. Yeah. With this serial or episodic storytelling is a different animal for me. And I'm having to figure it out because you're right. It's like every little dramatic arc has to crest and then come back down for the next issue and crest and come back down. It's neat to think like that, but you're right. It is very tricky, but to tell you the truth, it's the same way every individual issue works because every page turn has to be a little bit of a surprise. That's why you stage the splash pages on the even number pages and everything.
And as a horror, or not just a horror author, but like you write horror books, I've had this conversation with other people too about how jump scares and things like that in comic books. I know obviously this is not really in the sense straight up horror book, but I'm just saying like the idea that in a book you can just continue writing, but jump scares can't be on the bottom page, the right bottom page of the thing, because you're going to see that, you're going to get to that before it actually gets, you have to be on the next page. And some of that stuff was like that. You know, Earthdivers 1 came out about a month ago, so I don't like to as much, you know, ruin it for people, but I would like to leave a little bit of a warning to anybody who's going to listen to this, that if there is a spoiler on accident, you know, be aware of it, and read Earthdivers #1 before you come back and finish listening to this. But but there is some graphicness to it, and you do get that on, I think, you know, when you turn the page and he's in the past, there's some graphic moments there that you would ruin it almost if it was at the bottom right part of the page.
And not just graphic moments, but like moments of awe and splendor. Like when you in the first like 7 pages, I think page 6 and 7, you turn the page and you see the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria big on 2-page spread, and that kind of takes your breath away a little bit, you know.
And it's funny how you mentioned that page. I wrote in my notes as I was reading the comic, was that you mentioned being in school and this coming to you, or the idea of it behind school, is the idea that I don't think I've ever would have read a comic book that had the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria in it. I don't think it would have been one of those comic books that I picked up. And I think that if it was one of those comic books that I picked up as a, you know, white privileged male, it would have been in the idea of celebrating Christopher Columbus instead of the way that obviously we want to portray it in this comic book. And so it's just kind of funny when I read it, I was like, I just never thought, I mean, I think of reading superheroes and things like that, but actually seeing the ships in a way that I was bored in a history class trying to learn about these things.
It's kind of like, what's that old? There's that old issue. It's like a standalone where Wolverine is in a concentration camp. Do you remember that? I don't know if and I love that. It's like no dialogue, right?
Yes,
it's all quiet. And like, to tell you the truth, when I'm looking for a good time reading, I don't necessarily go to the concentration camp shelf. You know, but
exactly.
I mean, I'm not, which I love Mouse. Don't get me wrong. And, I mean, I think we all need to educate ourselves and know what terrible stuff happened. But all the same, sometimes you just want a happy Spider-Man story. You know?
Well, that's now you have to balance it out. I know there's one of my favorite comic books of all time is Nailbiter by Josh Williamson. And I felt myself that certain issues that if I read them in bed before I was going to bed, I'd have nightmares. And then it's like sometimes you just need to finish up with a little bit of a you know, Spider-Man in Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man or something like that.
Kind of like a palate cleanser. But no, I love Nailbiter. I'm kind of sad because I've got those big hardcovers they did of the first like 3 volumes. I've got the first 2, but I never could find the 3rd one, so I'm forever incomplete, man.
Completionists like that, you know, us comic book collectors, that's the way it is, right? But I talked to the guys who created the Free Speech Handbook a while back, and it was Ian Rosenberg and Mike Cavallero, and I had a conversation with them about learning something too in comic books. They could use comic books as a teaching medium as well, and in this sense trying to correct some of the teaching, but in a weird way. It's a weird way. Obviously this is fiction, everybody, just to let you know, this is not based in true life, but the idea that teaching people of some of the stuff that we shouldn't be celebrating, and why like Maine right now, we're Indigenous People Days and it happens in October, but learning from this and teaching people from comic books as well as just entertaining people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And this isn't really like edutainment for sure, but all the same, it is definitely steeped in history. You know, like this was my first novel, or not first, I'm calling it a novel because it's going to be so long, but this is my first story that I've actually had to do really not hands-on, but I've had to do research for. I had to read a lot of Christopher Columbus books and just read the logs and all that kind of stuff. And I also had to make decisions like, do I want to, like, you can find a manifest for the crew, and so I had to decide, do I want to use these actual names, or do I want to make up some likely names? And I ended up making up names because I felt bad indicting anybody but Columbus, because the rest of the people were just like pulling a check, you know, they were just working 9 to 5, or probably like midnight to midnight.
Midnight to 1 a.m. the next day. But it's one of those things that I think it's I've learned over the years, even just not even being historical, but I've learned over the years that I need a touch. My favorite comic books are the real life world with a touch of unbelievable. And that's what Earthdivers have, because it has like that real life world, like all this stuff really happened in that touch of time travel that makes it unbelievable to the real world.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, with Nailbiter, it's like that touch of unbelievable,
It is. Yeah.
you know, something's killing the children, is that something is
Yeah.
that so there's that touch of that. And I told my comic book the store owner, and I was like, that's what I love nowadays. Like I could read superheroes all day long, but something that goes, you turn the page and go, this could be real.
Yeah.
and I felt like that was something that Earthdivers gave me, which is like, if time travel existed, it could be real.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. But also talking about like the research and the like historical, I don't know, accurateness or whatever. I what I discovered, which I'd never done research, I didn't know this, but the research can provide like a scaffolding for for the shape of the story. I never knew that, because like when with this first voyage, I had to figure out when they see this, when they see that, when this storm came, and all that, and that became really important, like milestones along the way of crossing the Atlantic. It was really, really helpful.
And I guess it could be helpful and hindrance in the idea that you said, like the structure to it is that if you have a real life ships, you don't have to worry about trying to name the ships. You know what they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Take some pressure off on naming things, but then also there will be people out there, if you don't get something accurate, that attack you on Twitter or Facebook or anything like that and say, hey, that wasn't true. And you have to tell them it's a comic book.
Yeah, we actually had a last minute fix that specifically speaks to that. In I forget which issue. I want to say it might even be an issue 2. I have somebody at the wheel of the ship, and they're hauling. It's kind of jokey. They're hauling on it this way and this way. And then I got to doing some research, and it turns out that those steering wheels that we see that we associate with these old timey ships were not a thing in 1492. They had like a big stick on a rudder, basically, and so we had to redo everything such that it was a rudder and not a steering wheel.
That's pretty funny. It reminds me, I think I saw a behind the scene thing about Big Bang Theory, the TV show, and how that they actually had like staff scientists on the payroll, because they wanted to make sure that when Sheldon said certain things on TV, that he wasn't just spouting nonsense, that he actually was scientifically correct on the things he was saying. And again, cool. Like doing that research helps you so that you don't get the internet's very harmful to people. So you don't want to get put out to the pasture because you made a mistake but put a steering wheel in there instead of a stick.
But also there's stuff we don't know about. Like we still don't know exactly what Columbus's like language he spoke was. We know he spoke all these different languages, but we're not sure which one was the one he like did every day, and like his journal, his logs may be in Latin, and he was on a Spanish ship, so he spoke Spanish, and we assume he spoke Portuguese because all the mariners spoke Portuguese back then. But he also had Genovese, from Italy, and so it's weird. It's weird that that we can have an historical figure that's this like important, and we don't know what language he spoke. That's and
crazy. He had his own day.
Yeah, I know.
But you mentioned, and you did a creative way, and it was a very creative. By hearing you say that, it also that's a very creative way of explaining that almost in the comic book too. It's not like you didn't come out and say exactly what you just said, but the idea that he kind of like basically goes back in time and goes, oh, English, and then like he just like was like oh, and then Portuguese he mentions it. And it's a really cool way of explaining it without actually explaining it, and and that's something that again you get to make up in a sense, but it's hard for us as English speaking people to read a comic book. If say he spoke Portuguese the entire time, it's very hard for you to read an entire comic book in Portuguese. Obviously everything would have to have little brackets around it saying translated from Portuguese.
I know, and I didn't want to do those sharp brackets, I mean, I'm nothing against them, but I thought it would slow the reading down a lot,
It's one of those weird things. I do think that like historical movies that are all in English that weren't but then people are apprehensive to subtitles and all those stuff too, so not knowing and then just putting it in English, smart idea. Exactly.
I always like that trick they use in The Hunt for Red October, where Sean Connery, I guess he's a Russian captain, and and the camera zooms in on him speaking Russian and zooms out, and he speaks English as it zooms out, and that's just an amazing little trick, I think. And
like I said, and that's the way that you kind of did that similar thing with the way that explaining that he knows all these different languages, and that's one of the reasons why he was the one chosen to go back in time. And I, as I speak about that too, it's cool to see. You remind me of the native group with different characters, which they're from, where they're from.
There's Tat is the one that goes back, and then there's Sash and Emily and Yellow Kid.
Okay, and they're from 4 different tribes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they complain and argue obviously about who gets to go back and so on. And someone has to go back and they can't return. That's the whole reason why it's a problem, is the sacrifice that they have to do for something that affects them really. But really, they're doing it for the greater good and the greater group of people in the greater world, which is crazy to think about. And that's one thing I read it twice, 3 times, and it wasn't until the second time I read through that really came home to me, was that that sacrifice in it, which is pretty cool to put in there. And it's something that I always think of myself, would I be able to do?
Yeah, I know.
But again, it's hard for me. It's the same thing. I explain it. I used to have a co-host who had to move away, but we've had talked about this before, and he was a privileged white male, and it's hard for us sometimes to have conversations and be like, oh, I know exactly how they feel, and I'm like, I don't know how they feel. I have a pretty good life, and I don't usually struggle that often. and it's not like I don't want to be celebrated for it, but it's like I don't know. I can't help myself because I was born this way, and so obviously you have a different upbringing and different culture around you, and so it's really easier for you to understand and type these things out more than I would.
Yeah, but I'm sure I'm bound by privileges I have too. You know, I think we all are, and we're not even aware of them. And I think what you're doing is wonderful. That if you can just be aware of them in the first place, that's the first important step. You know, I think,
And like I said, it's not like I'm saving the world myself by buying your book and reading it. But just like I said, it opens up the culture to the fact that I'm not just reading. We talked about my comic book store owner. We have a book club every month, and this is one of the books that once you get to the point where it's in a trade, we do trades. And I said this is one of the ones I'll recommend for us to read in a trade, which would be kind of cool. But is that the reason we're changing some of these Marvel characters in the MCU is because back in the day when they were created, all they created was powerful white men. So we have to have some changes to make it more current. And so I feel like reading something that explores a little bit more is always nice to see that too with Earthdivers in that sense too. And I'm sure I said I haven't got a chance. I just told you at the beginning that I just found out you existed, which is not. It's. I wish I knew. But with 30 books out there, I probably should have known. But I did go out to the store this weekend and purchase
thank you.
My Heart as a Chainsaw.
Heart as a Chainsaw, nice.
And so I do have that, and I'm gonna read it, and I'm excited to read it. And so I'm sure you deal with these things in all of your stuff too. I'm just focusing right now on the comic book, but I'm sure you deal with the different cultures and stuff like that in your other books as well. I just want to make sure that people know that. I'll admit it, and I won't lie that I haven't read anything, but I'm planning to. Right. So
it's all right. Thank you very much. I hope you dig Chainsaw, man.
I'm excited. They did. That's the only one they had at the bookstore. We're Bangor, Maine is very it's a city, but it's a rural city. And we've got one big bookstore, and then my buddy owns a bookstore in downtown. But it was Halloween walking of kids downtown over the weekend, and he had a little bit of a preoccupied thing to help me find things in his very chaotic store, which he's gonna probably listen to this because he's a big fan of yours, and so he's probably gonna yell at me because I call the store chaotic, but I'll go back, and I forgot my wallet anyway, so he knows that I was like, I had a book on hold written by a former UMaine football player. I had a book on hold, and I was like, oh, I'll pick it up this week. You know, it's been on hold for like 2 months, and I was like, but my wife had walked out with my son and took my wallet with her, and I was like, I'll be back.
You know, talking to Banger, I was just talking to the Kingcast guys, Scott Wampler and Eric Vespi, and they were just in Bangor doing an event, and they said Bangor is the coolest town. If when I'm on tour for this next book I have, Don't Fear the Reaper, they said I've got to try to go through Bangor because it's everything good. You know, it's
really fun, and we had a local Comic-Con called Weekend of the Wicked recently that had the 4 or 5 of the original It kids.
Oh wow!
And John Campopiano, who does he did the It documentary on how they made the original 1990 thing in there, and then Bart Mixon, who did the special effects for the paint and makeup for Pennywise there. And he it was really cool to see all of them there. But then it was kind of funny. You actually probably appreciate this story. Couple weekends ago on a Friday night, I was just on Instagram scrolling through, and Charles Soule came up on his Instagram, and he was standing in front of Stephen King's house in Bangor. Okay. Charles is from or lives in Brooklyn, author, couple, New York Times bestseller author as well, but also writes Star Wars comic books and so on. And I text my buddy who owns the local comic book shop, and I said, hey man, what is he doing in Bangor? Like, there's nothing going on here. It just happens to be here. And he said, I don't know. And so he ended up going into my buddy's comic book shop the next day and signed a bunch of stuff, just said, hey, man, I want to buy it, bought some stuff. But I thought it was funny. I was like, how often do you think people visit Stephen King's house and stand in front and take a photo that we have no idea here?
I bet so.
You could just come up here. You could have Portland's more of the bigger city. So you can come up to your book stop in Portland and just say, you know what, taking an extra day, driving a couple hours north, hitting Bangor, and then going to my next spot. And no one would ever even know you were here because unless you promote it, it doesn't happen. But if you come up to Bangor, you want one, Briar Patch in downtown Bangor, I'll send your people some thing. They'd love probably to have you come do a book signing and stuff like that there. So he's a good fan of yours. So tangent there for Bangor, Maine. Bangor, Maine's great. It really is. And it is the backdrop. Nothing has really been filmed here for Stephen King stuff, but it is the backdrop to his stories. We're considered Derry, Maine, where we are right here. And it's fine. Speaking of that, I just got into horror stuff recently. So I just binged all of the horror movies in the past month. And I'm loving it. Rosemary's Baby was great. Halloween was great, but now I got to get into some books, right?
Man.
Read a book. And so back to the focus here, right? Writing novels versus comic books. Would you still side with novels over comic books, or is it a little bit of both?
I think back when I was 19 and I first started writing fiction, if I would have had just even the slightest, most overgrown inroad to comic books, I think I would have gone comic books and never gone to fiction, because I read a lot of novels, in my adolescence, but I probably read more comic books, I always felt like comic books saved my life. And so therefore I feel like I related to them in a different, more fundamental way, if that makes sense. As everybody knows, the hard part about comic books is if you can write, that doesn't mean you can draw. And it's hard to kidnap an artist and lock them in your basement and say, draw for me. That doesn't go over very well. It doesn't produce the best work. So I fell into
sounds like a good story though. You can make a novel out of that. Has bleeding hands from drawing, and there you go.
Exactly. So I fell into novels and fiction, and I've been doing that forever and ever, and I love that, and I'll never get out of that. But I do want to stay in comics. This to me doesn't feel like a detour from which I return in a few months. This feels like another home. This is somewhere where I'm going to stay. I don't know how many titles I can maintain. That's the trick. I noticed that like you'll see Scott Snyder or Jeff Lemire or all them guys, they'll do so many titles at once, and it just blows my mind. How can you write it well enough the first time that you can just hand it off to an artist and they can do it perfect? Maybe that's a degree of ability that I can someday hope to rise to, but I'm definitely not there yet.
Maybe 10 issues into Earthdivers, you have your relationship with your colorist and your artist that you just are able to do that. And that's something that if you look at some of these people, Jeff Lemire always has Andrea Sorrentino has been his go-to person and so on. And same, the other one is James Tynion. He just he's got 7 best-selling comic books out there at once, and then he's writing Substack and doing all this stuff. And I'm how are you human?
I know it's a lot of work, man. But the trick is I'll keep writing novels and novellas and stories too, so that'll always be at least half of my output, but I do want to, it's always been seeing Earthdivers on the new shelf at my local comic book store, Time Warp here in Boulder. That was the most magical feeling to me, because I'm there every Wednesday. I pick up my bag and then I go troll the new stuff to see what am I missing, and it's just so fulfilling, and it feels like a circle closing to see my stuff on that shelf. It
is really cool. I first time I saw one of my beer cans in a convenience store, to walk up there, I was just I made a poster. We had an event in New York City. A poster was hanging up on a wall in New York City, and I always told people jokingly that my art is hanging in New York City, because that's a pretty big thing.
That is,
no one knew it was on a bar wall advertising an event, but
that's
semantics,
cool,
right? But it's a really cool thing to see, and being a comic book fan and seeing that, it must be a really cool thing. And two things. One is you write something and you give it to your artist, then you could go write a novel, not you could write some of your novel and then go back and forth. Plus, people are forgiving in the comic book world, I think, for little hiatuses. So if you did volume 1 of Earthdivers and then waited a little bit, and then volume 2, people, I think most of us are understanding to that. we've got so much stuff to read in the first place that
That's
it's
true.
nice to have a break to go to something.
That's true. That's true.
I mean,
And
what's his name? Saga. Brian K. Vaughan took like 3 years off.
He did. I know, man. He just made us hungrier and hungrier. That was nice. But talking about those hiatuses,
Yeah.
the plan for Earthdivers is to do 3 arcs of 6 issues each. However, in between those arcs, to keep it a monthly book, we're going to do a series of one-shots just so it'll stay on the shelf,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is awesome. And that's something that I wish that some other people did too.
Yeah.
For sure on that too. But so you mentioned, so Earthdivers number 2 comes out when this drops. So today, so grab that LCS. And if people haven't, if there is some copies, make sure you pick up Earthdivers number 1, of course. And if, like I said, I've always said, I'm a big floppies guy. Like I like to read my physical copies.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But if you can't get it at your LCS, there are digital options. So make sure you read option or number 1 before you get obviously number 2. And then have them, if you like it, have your LCS, get them issue 3 and so on, and get it in your pull box for sure. And you also wrote on Indigenous Voices number 1 from Marvel Voices. That was technically your first foray into comic books, right?
Well, no, actually.
Oh, really?
No, I had done. Shoot, it's been a few years now. I'm a professor at University of Colorado Boulder, and we had the Shakespeare's first folio, like it was on a it was like on a tour, like Motley Crue, and it came through CU to have a display for a few days and all that, and it was such a big thing, a big event that they asked me to write a comic book for it. And I worked with a good comic book artist, and so we got that single issue out. It's just a freebie, but it was like that's probably the longest signing line I've ever worked. It lasted like 2 or 3 hours, so that was officially my first comic. But in 2017 I did a really experimental comic called My Hero, and I did it as a published script that has weird almost illustrations. It's really not your usual comic book at all. It's really close to my heart, but it's also not it's like doing a comic book without pictures is not the way to do a bestseller, but still I felt like I had to do it. And then what was it, last year maybe, I did a little graphic novel called Memorial Ride with University of Mexico Press, which was their first graphic foray. But yes, Earthdivers is my first monthly comic, and my first comic with a big house, and it's such a different experience because all my other comic stuff is I was pretty much in the fiction model. Like I write the script and that's my job. I'm done, but with IDW, it's such a collaboration every step of the way. It's I'm involved with it, which is wonderful. I can really help steer things and also probably mess things up, but but I love the process. I love the product that process produces,
Yes,
that makes sense.
And I heard good things about IDW. A good friend of mine, Ben Bishop, who writes or draws on the now Last Ronin, TMNT Last Ronin stuff. Nice. He's from Westbrook, Maine, Portland, Maine area, and he says the relationship with the IDW and things like that are really good too. He was actually on his artwork is the variant cover for
that's
a IDW exclusive.
That's the cover I know of that book. Yeah.
And so he always says IDW is a pretty good spot to be at, and so I think that IDW is putting out some great stuff, and seeing that Earthdivers was on that was made me happy too. So but that's comic books. I mean, you said you mentioned a book. What's the next novel you got coming out?
Oh, the next novel, let me see if I can shake my junk off it. It's Don't Fear the Reaper. I don't have my camera. I can't see myself. It's the sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw. Like My Heart is a Chainsaw is going to be, it's a trilogy, so I turned the third one in already. But yeah, Don't Fear the Reaper, it's a slasher. That's my next book. My most recent book was Babysitter Lives in August, the audio novel. But all between that, it's Earthdivers. Yeah.
and I want to get into one more thing, and we'll finish up here. But so Earthdivers is also maybe making its debut in something else at some point in the future. I know it takes a long time for it to make this thing, but it might be on TV at some point. Is that true?
Yeah. 20th Television picked it up, and we just had a meeting last week. I believe we've got a really, really quality showrunner. I can't say who it is.
That's fine. Yeah.
But everybody behind the scenes, like the people who actually, have their finger on the green light button, they're just saying, do it, and so it feels like it's going to happen. And I think the fact that Earthdivers, like it sold out in 2 days, and they had to go into a second printing. I think that kind of makes studios like look over there, Yeah.
It's funny how seeing this nowadays too, because obviously the news of this, you obviously had an interview with another publication, and that where you said it had been picked up by that news had dropped obviously before Earthdivers #1 even hit the shelves. It seems like like I wrote an article a number of months ago about comic books that should be optioned for TV or movies. And I put one in there. Grimm from Boom Studios is a really great comic book that I really like right now. And it was only after the first issue where I was like, this would make a great, screen project. And someone commented, which obviously comments on the internet are crazy, about how we have no right to say that because only one issue's been out. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, there have been multiple things nowadays where one issue is out or a few issues are out, and TV they're trying to create things off of great storylines. And if you have a great storyline in a comic book, I don't understand why they would take it before it's out.
No, I totally agree. And, talking adaptations of comic books to feature or television, I do feel like the last 8 or 10 years, there's been a kind of an upswell of screenwriters will have a project that they can't sell. And so the studio will say, if this was pre-existing IP, we might buy it. So they go out and kind of, if it's almost like they turn a script into a storyboard and then color it,
Yes.
And then they sell that graphic novel, comes out in whatever format or from whatever house, and maybe they sell that, but I worry about that dynamic too, because I feel like those projects are possibly not maximizing the comic book form. Like with Earthdivers, I'm never thinking about adaptation. I'm thinking, what's the most I can do with this page? What's the most I can do with this tier, with this panel, with this image, with this line of dialogue, and I always want to be I love the comic book form. I love the freedoms it provides, and I want to maximize that in every way I can.
And you can tell it sometimes. I read a book and I'm like, this seems like it was crafted to be something else. You can feel that. And then you have the feel the books are like, this is never going to be on TV. And then you have something like in the middle with Earthdivers where you can see how it can be made into something else, but it lives in the storylines in comic book form, which is good. And that's something like that medium in there is great to see. And obviously, as you know, an adaptation, you're not going to have full control over in the first place anyway. So if you do something in the comic book, they could change the person's name or whatever, likely in the future. So getting hung up on that now would be, might be worthless in the long run.
It might be. For something to become television, they have to externalize all the internal turmoil, and doing that often requires throwing up a mirror character who doesn't exist in the comic book or the whatever,
Yeah, we've seen that with The Walking Dead. If anybody's a Walking Dead TV show fan, we've definitely seen that. I can reread all 193 issues. Not sure I can watch the whole TV show over and over and over again on that too. And then lastly, just quickly, I mean, are you reading anything right now? Anything current or past? I mean, obviously we know you love, you mentioned Secret Wars back in the 80s, but is there anything else you're reading right now? Novel-wise or comic book?
We were talking Tinian earlier. I just read 2 days ago, The Closet, the first volume of The Closet. That I'm kind of worried for that kid,
I want to show it to my kid, right? My kid's 18 months old. I'll be like, read this thing. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that is the kind of book that makes you be a better parent, I should listen to this kid when he says something,
He's not lying. There is something in the closet.
I know. And I think the day before that, what did I read? Oh, Stray Dogs. Stray Dogs was pretty fun. That was kind of wicked. It was it's weird when you hotwire or hybridize two completely remote things. This is a serial killer story, but it's also a all dogs go to heaven story. And
I had Tony Fleece on the podcast. Wow. I don't know, last year. And it was interesting to see his take on it too. And then he came up to this area actually to do a Comic-Con and meet him. And that book that's also somewhere headed towards TV. And that dark animation is going to be something that's going to throw a lot of parents for a loop. They're going to have some sort of splash screen at the beginning. It's like, this is not all dogs go to heaven.
For sure. And I guess wait. I just got a call that my next Benjamin Percy Wolverine is in, so I got to go get that. He's always I love Benjamin Percy and I love Wolverine, so it's a great pairing.
Yeah, exactly. That's to say, I'm going to these people are asking me. The recent Marvel world has not been my favorite, but my comic book store owner and I are going to do an end of the year best comic books of 2022. And I'm trying to put this list together. And I was thinking, I'm a big Marvel person. Like Marvel's been my thing since I was young. I was trying to think, do I throw number 10? Do I throw a Marvel book in there just to have a Marvel book on the list? Or am I going complete independent this year? And we'll see. There's definitely some independent layers, some storylines and some artists and some authors that are good. I'm just independent to me this year has been like the goal and the key thing for me.
Well, I guess talking big like independent versus big house is like Snyder has been DC forever, but now Snyder's everywhere and doing everything. I think I just read 2 number 1s from him. What is it? Night of the Ghoul and Dark Spaces : Wildfire. That it's in the IDW thing with me. Both like I really like Snyder. He almost has like a Brian Michael Bendis kind of direction or slant to the stuff he does, you know, and it's got a density that doesn't slow down the storytelling. You know, and I really appreciate it.
I'm glad you mentioned Brian Michael Bendis. He's one of my favorites. So he's got a new book coming out this week. I think it is.
Really?
The Ones.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
It's The Ones. It's about like all the different people that were told they're the one in different cultures and generations and time all together fighting the one. Seems pretty cool. I mean, Brian Michael Bendis to me can't do no wrong in that sense. But I want him to come back to Marvel, but that's not going to happen. But yeah, it's a great world of comic books right now. And like I said, you're just I don't want to make your head too big, but you're just adding to it. And it's great. And I'm looking forward to picking up issue number 2 on the day this drops. So again, thank you. The second printing, is the second printing out yet, or is it coming out?
I haven't seen it on the shelf yet. Okay. It may still be en route. Yeah.
Okay. But when the second printing of that comes out too, pick that up, people, because it's definitely worth it. And use StephenGrahamJones.com. Yeah.
And or demontheory.net. It's the same thing. And I'm only on Twitter is the only social media I'm on. And depending on how long Twitter lasts,
I heard some things, man. I'm not like, it's just, I read an article or a post this morning saying people are getting suspended and blocked for no apparent reason right now. And he brought a sink into the high court. I don't know.
I saw that. And well, also I saw Stephen King tweeting this morning that they're now asking blue check people to pay $20 a month to maintain their blue check,
Well, when you spend $44 billion on something that you don't actually even want, I understand trying to get your money back out of it, but a little much here. Okay. But yeah, let's keep our fiction. Let's read some fiction some more, because I feel like reading things that are nonfiction right now, it just makes me depressed and sad. So I'll continue reading the fiction stuff and get my comic book world. There's bigger things going on in this world, people, that you should pay attention to. But you know what? Sometimes you just need that escape and read some stuff. One of the nearly 30 novels over here by Stephen Graham Jones, and pick up this, and it's hard to see right there. Chainsaw. Hard as a Chainsaw, and then pick up Earthdivers for sure. But I really appreciate you coming on and talking. And let's hope, maybe we'll get you back on when some more news happens with the TV show or movie or whatever is going to happen with it. Or maybe when the book comes out. And if you are, I'll look you up when you come up to this area, and we'll talk too. So
for sure.
I really appreciate it, man. And have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your Halloween.
You too, man. Take it easy. Later.